Now, you know how I don't like to use the sit-down gun, but this morning we just don't have time for mucking about.
Gamers! We are the best at complaining about games. We're not necessarily the best at vocalizing exactly how things should be fixed or the things that we're upset with within a game. And to be honest with you, that's not our responsibility to do so. That's actually the developer. They're the ones that are supposed to listen to our complaints and be able to, well, figure out what solutions are necessary to make the game play the way that it should, make it the most enjoyable it possibly can be. So what I wanted to try to do today is I wanted to try to highlight the successes of a game like Baldur's Gate 3, the things that make players love it so much, and how some of those things might be able to be applied to a game like Diablo 4, a game with one foot in the grave. Now, Diablo 4 is actually one of the first games that I ever covered on this channel. I covered it quite thoroughly. It was a game that I was incredibly high on, a game that I was very, very charitable towards, far more than I ever should have been. Lessons learned on that. To be honest, I just really didn't know how Blizzard worked that much. Then I learned. That was a wake-up call. But regardless, I thought it would be really cool and valuable for us to better understand the things that we enjoy about these games and how they might be applied to other games to make them more successful in the future. While developers probably aren't going to listen to a small YouTuber like me, maybe there might be one that listens to this and goes, huh, that's a good idea. Let's start with itemization. Oh my, oh Lord. Blizzard, what is going on here? How many affixes and suffixes do you need? I feel like while I'm scrolling through the potential list of stats, I'm rolling movie credits. You know there are over 1 trillion ways to lace up a shoe, but at the end of the day, you only really need one. Ultimately, Diablo 4's itemization turned me off of the game almost completely. Yeah, I make videos about video games, but I'm a casual gamer at heart. I have 2 to 3 hours to play after work. I don't have the time to parse out every single piece of gear and make sure it has 2 usable stats out of the greater list of what feels like an infinite number of combinations where some of these stats are additive or maybe they're obfuscated by the fact that they're mirrored versions of that stat, like damage while chilled or damage while frozen. Now we go and we look at a game like Baldur's Gate 3. Oh look, it's a Great Axe +1. It does more damage. Rudimentary? Yes. But it's far more attractive and far easier to understand for the player. And of course, it's not just as simple as it does more damage. Depending on the weapon type, it could be a two-handed weapon, or maybe it's versatile. Maybe the weapon will come with unique skills or techniques that are only for that weapon and that weapon type, because it's slashing or penetrating or a bludgeoning damage weapon. As you start to progress the gear tiering in Baldur's Gate 3, the complexity of the items slowly grow with the player, but it still remains relatively simple. Damage modifiers may increase to +2, maybe the item gains a unique passive where even if you miss, you still do some damage, or maybe you gain access to unique skills that may not normally be available for your class. This kind of sounds familiar, right? Oh, that's right, a game that Blizzard has never heard of, Diablo 2. Diablo 2 had relatively simple stat modifiers, things like critical hit or mana leech, life leech, things like that. You would pick up the weapon and you would very instantly know exactly what that weapon was going to do. But as you progress through the game, all of a sudden you started seeing these random stat modifiers on some of those weapons. And some of those stats were coming, or some of those skills were coming from other classes entirely, which then transformed your ability to play the game entirely. You look at a game like Baldur's Gate 3 and they do something very similar. I can find a pair of boots that have Misty Step. Now all of a sudden my barbarian is teleporting all around the battlefield. This changes the way that I go into encounters. This changes the way that I strategize for every fight that I'm in. This is something that's really desperately missing from a game like Diablo 4. Look, I'm not going to go down the whole road of Diablo 2 is better than Diablo 4. However, what I am saying is that less can be more. I recently watched an Actman video that he posted quite a while ago talking about how Diablo 4 is getting worse. And in his video, he posed this theory that the overly complex itemization was a way to slow down player progression, thus keeping players longer and maximizing their profits, because the longer players play, the higher the chance they engage with microtransactions. I'm actually going to refute that part. One, because I feel like that's far too methodical for Blizzard. And two, it really lessens player retention in the long run, because the target audience for Diablo 4 is the casual gamer. They are far more likely to run into a wall where their character just stops working entirely because, well, they just don't understand the itemization. It's far too complex. He's giving far too much credit to Blizzard and overestimating the attention span of the target audience that actually purchases microtransactions in the first place. Now, I'm not refuting that they put busy work into the game, adopting mobile game time sinks and different ways to slow players down, but I don't think it was ever meant to get to the level of absurdity that it's at right now. Now, I'm going to give you a different theory, and you can tell me whether or not you find it more believable. My theory is that the game had reportedly over 9,000 employees involved with the development of Diablo 4, and as a result, that's having way too many hands in the petri dish. A lack of strong leadership and a lack of creative vision, now all of a sudden you have a monstrosity that has grown completely out of control. Mind you, let's tack on the fact that a lot of this work was being completed while a lot of employees were trapped in their homes between 2020 and 2023. And it wouldn't be far off to assume that since the lawsuits and the controversies in 2018, it's likely that a lot of these teams were relatively isolated and not communicating with one another, making sure that there weren't any other issues that were going to arise in the workplace. I've said it multiple times on this channel in the past, but strong leadership and great creative vision is what makes a successful game. It's what makes successful products to begin with. You know the names of the producers and some of the owners of the companies that have made your favorite games in the past. By now, Sven Vinke is a household name because people love Baldur's Gate 3. They recognize the product that was made. They see the creative leadership. They see the results of that work. Now, you look at a game like Diablo 4, it's really difficult to believe that this was some concerted effort for them to use player retention and try to weaponize that in a way for them to increase monetization. It's far more likely that they just weren't communicating with one another, and that's the result that we ended up seeing with this game that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense at the end of the day. Truly insidious game development is making a really good game and then packing microtransactions into it. But that's not Diablo 4. Now, you can fry me in the comments on this one, but I think Blizzard's class design in Diablo 4 is boring as all hell. There are only a few options, few no-brainer options for abilities to pick from, and the rest of them just may as well not even exist because either they functionally don't even work or there's no gear to actually support those abilities in the first place. Looking at a class like Rogue, even the best builds that you can achieve in the game are functionally the same as any other build that you would make. Maybe you're only rotating out one or two abilities. Outside of that, you get this relatively bland Paragon board with stat increases past level 50. Now, Baldur's Gate 3, on the other hand, is using the 5th edition rule set of D&D, using class design that not only drastically transforms the player's class over time, but also changes your combat tactics through these incredibly diverse subclasses and character choices, like a paladin breaking their oath and becoming a necromancer, or a warlock going from a spellcaster to a two-handed sword-wielding eldritch knight. The rule set also allows classes to be able to pull from a general list of spells, and other class-specific ones that add a lot of different value to players being able to theory craft and have a lot of build diversity. And at this point, we're not even talking about multi-classing, which adds a serious amount of depth, a ton of replayability, and so much more build diversity that it would blow your mind. I can go 5 levels into Warlock and then 5 levels into Paladin and then 2 levels into Fighter, or whatever kind of mix of different classes I want to meld together to make my own personal hero. And that should be kind of the goal of a lot of these games. I'm sure I'm probably going to get a few people in the comment section that are like, well, you know, they kind of have to because Baldur's Gate 3 goes to level 12 and Diablo goes to level 100. Well, then my thing is to you, what does it say about build diversity when a game that has 12 levels has more diversity than a game that has 100? Like I said before, it's not my job to figure out what the solution is for them. That's their job to figure that out. I'm just good at pointing out the problem. Fans of Diablo 2 loved the ability to use abilities from other classes. Now imagine how different Diablo could be if they took a page from Grim Dawn, a game that allows you to be able to multi-class to the point of specialization, where multi-classing is actually a way for you to be able to find a subclass within the game. Or go look at a game like Last Epoch that has unique subclasses for each one of the main classes and doesn't just rely on minor stat adjustments for anything past level 50. Imagine a Diablo 4 where after reaching level 50, you could continue to specialize in Barbarian, gaining access to more cool abilities or different subclasses, or you could start dipping into the Necromancer tree, gaining the ability to summon skeletons that whirlwind with you like a bunch of Beyblades being lit loose together. Now, this all kind of rewinds back to what I was talking about with the itemization. Because they have this really overly complex itemization in Diablo 4, they're really limiting the greater heights that they could actually achieve. If we're looking at a game like Baldur's Gate 3 or even just Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition as a base, We're looking at something that has the ability to reach greater heights because they put more effort, more value, more weight into the choices that we make with our characters, in these character-defining features, like the Warlock being able to pick Pack of the Blade, going from a spell slinger to a melee class. That's way more cool. That's way more transformative. That's way more fun than finding an item that makes my abilities bounce around a little bit more, or automatically trigger, or makes me teleport around the room, or something like that. That's much more fun, and that gives the player much more control over their experience. Now, this isn't something that I think is just a Diablo problem. This is actually an industry-wide issue where a lot of these developers are just getting away from the foundation of the things that actually inspired them to make these great games in the first place. Hell, Diablo was actually based on Dungeons & Dragons from the beginning. It was going to be a turn-based game if it wasn't for a last-minute vote. That's real history. You can go check that if you want. I'm not going to link it. But in my opinion, when I'm looking at Diablo 4, if they cut out 90% of the affixes and suffixes, they got rid of the Paragon board past level 50 and instead gave us the ability to multi-class, or gave us the ability to pick more class-defining features past level 50, the game would have way more variety and just be way more fun for the player to engage with. Okay, time for a little bit of transparency. I didn't quit Diablo 4 to go play Baldur's Gate 3. I quit well before that because I found I was having way more fun making videos about Diablo 4 than I was actually playing the game. And that's because it was boring. It's not a you don't like ARPGs or you don't like Diablo games kind of thing. It's just the game is boring. The loot is boring. The classes are boring. The world is boring. And the gameplay loop is also boring. Oh, let's do some Season of the Mundane, guys. Watch as I do the same dungeon over and over again. Oh, the Helltide is up. Hopefully I find an area where someone hasn't already killed everything so I can get disappointed by a Helltide chest and then go back to doing the same dungeon over and over again. I remember watching a Blizzard video of dungeon designers playing Diablo 4 and talking about how they were reducing backtracking, and I realized that I have zero complaints about backtracking in Baldur's Gate 3, a game that has a static map, a map that doesn't change, a game that I have put tons, hundreds of hours into at this point, even just in the first act, for over 3 years in early access, and still never got bored. In Baldur's Gate 3, you can travel between A and B on a map. There's always a direct route to take. However, every single corner always has something to behold, whether that's a site or an item. Maybe it's a key that you randomly found or a door that's been locked. Maybe it's a side quest or an NPC. There's always some type of point of interest all around every single area throughout the entire game. Now, all of these different branching paths that technically still lead to the same place offer you all of these opportunities for unique approaches. If I use something like the Goblin Camp in Act 1 as an example, I can raid the Goblin Camp directly. I can walk straight through the gates and start attacking people. Or I can come around the mountainside, over the cliff, and through the back door. Or I can go underneath and find a tunnel that leads me up underneath the temple. There's all these different approaches that always lead to the same conclusion. But it's your option. It's your ability to choose which one you want to take. Your own adventure. Now, I realize that Diablo 4 and Baldur's Gate 3 are fundamentally different games. One is action-based, driven by loot and slaying monsters. The other is tactical, narrative-driven, and tabletop-inspired. However, that doesn't mean that Diablo 4 has to use the same design principles that they've always used. Every dungeon seems to end in a final encounter, or by killing everything in the dungeon. Rinse and repeat. Imagine if there was something around every single corner. Maybe they introduced something where there were various puzzles against different tile sets. You clear the map, stumble upon a puzzle, and it gives you the chance to solve it or brick it. But if you do solve it, then all of a sudden you get a chest that guarantees a legendary, or maybe it opens up a special loot room or another area of the dungeon. Maybe the dungeon generates various ways for you to be able to complete it. Maybe you could supercharge the boss, or give more loot, or double the amount of bosses that are at the end. The fact is, with dungeons the way they are now, players don't want to backtrack because they know that there's not going to be anything for them to find, other than maybe a single chest that they forgot or an elite pack they missed. There isn't anything surprising, and as mentioned previously, the gear isn't particularly exciting, so you're even less incentivized to go back and clear every single thing on a map. Now, you may be wondering, what inspired you to make this video in the first place? And it's actually like a two-part thing. One, I noticed that a lot of the developers for Diablo 4 have been playing Baldur's Gate 3. They've been talking about it on Twitter, and I'm hoping that some of those guys are sitting back and looking at the game, playing it, enjoying it, and thinking to themselves, wow, we should have done that. Or, wow, that would be really cool if that was in Diablo 4. That might not actually be the case, but it's the case that I hope it is. Also, there's a very relatively small streamer that most people probably don't know of called Zach Rar. Looks a lot like Asmongold. That has once said before, Blizzard is one of the best companies at stealing other companies' ideas and implementing them into their own games. And it's something the company desperately needs to get back to. I don't know if it's a lack of creative vision or they're just too focused on monetization or whatever it might be, but they really do need to start pulling inspiration from a lot of these other developers. We've had talks about monetization and pricing and stuff like that in the first, on different videos in the past, but at the end of the day, we just want good games as a result of any of these conversations to begin with. So if we can at all point these guys in the right direction, give them the right kind of inspiration, that's something that I want to do. And again, I said this earlier, this is a small YouTube channel. Chances are they're not going to come across this. They're not going to watch it. They're not going to enjoy it because it criticizes their game, and nobody really likes to have their work criticized too hard. But it's something that needs to happen because if they want to learn and they want their game to be successful, they have to grow. They have to evolve. And they have to look for things that are going to take them back to the roots of what made their games great to begin with. The Diablo franchise has always been a hallmark in the RPG community, whether you want to admit it or not. It's a game that many of us have played, if not all of us have played, if you've ever played an RPG to begin with. I want it to be good. I want Diablo to be a great game because that gives me more great games to play. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys have some improvements that you think would work for Diablo 4 or things that you would like to see Baldur's Gate inspire in the future for other games or RPGs, leave them down in the comments. Outside of that, make sure you guys follow me on Twitch if you guys haven't already. I stream there sometimes. I also will stream on YouTube every once in a while as well. And join the Discord. A lot of folks have been coming into the Discord, and it's been a lot of fun, and people have also been giving me a lot of really cool ideas for videos and stuff like that in the future. I need to hear about more games that you guys play. Otherwise, I'm only ever going to cover Baldur's Gate 3, and that's only going to last for so long. So, or will it? Maybe it'll go on forever. What if this is just our life now? Anyway, stay cool, stay righteous, stay safe, my friends, and I'll see you in Baldur's Gate. Peace!